Hi everyone, my name's Titus, and today we're going to be working on part 5 of our Pong mini-series. We'll set up the logic for the boost and spin mechanic, as well as set up a pause screen. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. I think first starting off, let's create the widget for the pause screen. So you can right click under user interface, select widget blueprint, and we'll choose the user widget. We'll give this a title, WBP_pause. We'll double click to open it up, and the widget's going to be pretty simple. This won't be a fancy pause screen. We're just going to add in a canvas panel, and then we will need a text element. The text element we can anchor center, and then to actually move your text there, you got to hold Control and then click center, and then to offset it, go back and hold Shift, and then click it one more time, and then that'll center it. The text is a bit small. Let's actually just put pause, and let's make it a little bit bigger. And let's maybe use a light font. We'll try Droid, and I think that looks pretty good. You have to check the box for size to content if you want the anchor to center it, and I think that looks pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do is just add a blur background. So you just drop this in here. And then for the anchor, I just want to select full screen and then go back and hold Control, and then it'll move it basically to the full screen. Then for the blur strength, I'm just going to bump it up till everything kind of blurs out. Now I do want the text to be clear. I just want everything else to be fuzzy. So we can go back to the text element on the left-hand side, and for the Z order, I can put a higher order, like 1, and it'll bump it in front of the blur background. You can also put the blur background on like -1 and it'll move it back, so however you want to do that. So I'm going to compile and save, and that'll complete my widget for the pause screen. Now let's open up our BP_player, and let's actually set up the code to be able to call that pause screen. So currently we just have 2 input actions. We have our, well actually we only have 1. We have our move, and then our controller change event. So what we can do is in a blank spot, we'll just right click and we'll do a event begin play. And this basically executes right when the object is instantiated and the game begins. I'm gonna drag off and create a widget. The widget I'm gonna create is gonna be that WBP_pause, and then I'm just going to right click on the return value, promote it to a variable, and I will just call this the pause reference. Now I basically have that stored in the player blueprint. You can also do this in the game manager if you wanted to do it there too. It doesn't really matter. And now we can basically set up the logic to call this. So let's actually do this through our enhanced controller input. So we can go to our controller folder, and we need a new action. So under input, we will select input action, call it IA_pause. And that's kind of just the basic stuff here. It's just a digital boolean, so it's good for now. There is an issue with it, but we will fix that in a second. And then we can go into our input mapping context. We hit the little plus sign to add a new element. I will then fill that element with the pause action, and then I have to set up the buttons that'll actually allow you to pause the game. So I think one should just be maybe the P key, and then I'm going to add another and use my controller. So I'll just hit the little record button, and then I'll hit the pause button on my controller. That way I have a way to pause the screen on both the keyboard as well as the controller. I will save that, and we can go back to the player now. I can then call that function, so I can go IA_pause, and you see there's an enhanced action event. And then I can pull off into a flip-flop, and then I can basically grab my pause reference and do a get on it. And then in one path I can add to viewport, and in the other path I can remove from parent. And then a flip-flop basically does one, then the other. So first time it's called, add it to the viewport. Second time it's called, remove it from the viewport. And that'll just basically be the logic that we use for the pause screen. Now there is an issue with using triggered. If you basically tap trigger, depending on what kind of keyboard you're using or controller, it might fire very quickly. So you might get it multiple times. So instead of triggered, I'm actually going to move it into the started option. So that way it only does it once. So now if we compile and save, and we go back to our project, if I play, you can see I can pause the game. The game obviously doesn't pause, it just adds the widget, and then I can press P again, and it will unpause the game, so that works pretty good. Now, we actually want to pause the game, so there's a built-in function in Unreal for that. So if you pull this off, you can do set game pause, and we're going to set that to true on the first call, and set game paused again, and we'll set it to false on the second option. And this is where the issue that I called out on the action earlier is going to be. So if we compile and save, this isn't going to work. You'll notice I can pause the game, but I can't unpause it. And that's basically because the event isn't allowed to be triggered while it's paused. If we open up that action under pause, there is a checkbox that says you can trigger when paused. You want to make sure you have that checked. And then when you save, we can launch the game again, we can pause, and then I can unpause it, and that works, and then my controller can also pause the game. So that's basically a pause function that is at least working for us. Okay, so now that we have the pause widget all set up, we can now work on creating the logic for our basically our spin move and our boost. So I think starting off, we'll want to create a material. So right click, select material. We'll do m_boost, and this is just a visual representation so we can see that the player is boosting. You can maybe add additional functionality, like maybe only give them a stamina bar and you only allow them to boost so much, you know, kind of whatever you want to do with your project. For the blend mode, I'm going to use a translucent because I'm just going to make a simple emissive. So I'm going to hold 3, click on the graph, I'm going to make that a red color, and then I'm going to hold M, click on the graph to grab a multiply node, and then I'm just going to multiply this by like 1,000, plug this into emissive, and just a simple bright material that'll work for this use case. All right, so now let's go back and we got to create the code for the boosting. Now we created the action in the first video, I_boost, and then we also have spin, which we'll do in a second. So we can say when boost is triggered, we can set the movement scalar to a higher value. So currently the movement is set at 20, so I can maybe change it to 50. And then when I'm boosting, I can grab the paddle and then set the material. And then the material we'll use that boost material we just made. That way we can tell when the player is actually boosting. And then on the completed, we can hold the Alt key, drag in the movement scalar, and then we'll set it back to its default value, which was 20. And then we can use our paddle and set the material back to the emission, I think is what we called it, emission, yep. So if we compile and save, let me go ahead and try the controller. If I hold left trigger, you can see it moves really fast. If I don't, kind of moves slow. That's kind of the idea anyways. Something simple, nothing too crazy. But our boost mechanic is working. So the next one is going to be our spin mechanic. So we will do IA_spin for the event. And then once this is started, we can do a add timeline. I'm going to call this the spin timeline. I want it to play from the start every time. And then all I want to do is I want to take the static mesh for the paddle and I want to change its relative rotation. And then the update will basically go there, and then we need to set up the timeline to actually have a rotation value. Now I'm only going to be rotating along the z-axis, so I don't really need to change the x and the y, so I don't really need to make a rotator. So I can right click and just split this to have access to the individual pieces. And then if I double click on my timeline, I can set the track length. This is going to be very short, like I want it less than 1 second, so maybe 3/4 of a second. And then I want one single float track, and we'll call this my rotation. And then I'm going to have 3 keyframes. So I'll have one at 0, 0, and then I want a second keyframe at maybe 1/4 of a second, so maybe 0.25. And then I want to rotate back -20 degrees. So basically come down a bit. And then the last keyframe I want will be at the end, so 0.75. And then I want to rotate 720 degrees. So basically rotate back and then forward, and then that'll basically kind of complete the spin. So now I have this rotation value that I can just plug into the z-axis here. And then if we compile and save, go back and play the prototype, you can notice I can actually spin that. So now if I can actually hit it, we can increase the velocity. Now the controller is basically reversed, but that's alright, that kind of works in my favor. Now we basically have a boost move and a spin move. Alright everyone, I think we'll cut it here, but in the next vid we'll work on creating the title screen for this project. But as always, thanks for watching, consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.